Hi, I'm Scott from National Museums Liverpool, and I'm here today with Senior Curator of Antiquities, Ashley Cook.
Hi.
Who's going to give us a little preview of our new Ancient Egypt gallery here at World Museum. So maybe we should start talking a little bit about the development of the gallery and how that came about.
Yeah, it's almost 3 years ago that we got together and decided we wanted to extend the Egyptian gallery. And now we have a gallery that's 3 times the size of our old gallery. We brought out lots more objects. We've also been able to talk about lots of new subjects that weren't in the old gallery. And one of the big narratives of the exhibition is how the Egyptians thought they could get to an afterlife. It wasn't guaranteed. They needed help with the way of magical spells and magical amulets, including Shabti figures. And we've got about 800 in the collection. And we'd recently published a catalogue last year. This is all part of the reasons why we want to extend the gallery. So we've been doing so much work with the collections in storage. We want to bring them out of storage. So we go over this part of the gallery. We can look at some of these magical figures.
Some of these figures.
Yeah. And you can see behind us that we've got some big topics that we talk about, which are kind of key themes in Egypt. One of them is linen that we walk past, but this other one is magical figures that the Egyptians call Shabtis, which you can see here. And you can see one of them's turned round the other way. It's not a mistake on my behalf. But what we've done, there's 2 sides to this display panel, and you can go around the other side and find out more about the actual spells that are written on these Shabbats. If you look really closely, you can see there's all these hieroglyphs, and they often are from a standard spell 6 from the Book of the Dead.
And what did that spell do?
That spell essentially commanded the Shabti to come to life. It's quite an odd thought to think of these things coming to life in the tomb, but that's what the Egyptians thought would happen. And these belong to the real elite of society. We're talking kind of 2-3% of the Egyptians that could usually literate, could read, write. And these are the people that didn't really work in the field. So we've got a graphic behind us of a farmer in the fields. And this is what Shabtis really represent. They represent the people that are working on the land. So we're talking 95 or more % of people in ancient Egypt were growing crops and looking after the canals, doing digging. And that's why the Shabtis have got these little tools, these hoes, for breaking up the soil, but also doing other kind of duties. And the elite were a bit frightened. So, death wasn't the end for an ancient Egyptian. They were going on somewhere else. But they're also a bit nervous. Death has always been a mystery, and it was for the Egyptians. So they were really confused about the fact that there'd be gods in the afterlife, and they would be a lower status than they were in life. So they might have to get their hands dirty, do some work in the field. So they came up with this idea of having these figures that will, if a god says, Scott, go and work in the field, do some ploughing, do some sowing of seeds, these will come to life and no, Scott, I'll do it for you. Yeah, so that's what they do.
One of them belonged to someone quite special.
Oh yeah, down here, we've got 2 actually, 2 in the centre, and they were collected by Florence Nightingale, who went on a Nile voyage, 1849, 1850, with her friends Charles and Selina, and she brought back a collection of antiquities that were donated to us in 1949, and that was really part of the campaign by this museum, by the staff here, particularly Elaine Tankard, one of the curators of antiquities, to rebuild the collections, because we lost about 3,000 Egyptian objects in World War II when the museum was hit by a bomb and the fire swept through the Egyptian gallery. And that's part of our theme for our new gallery, is that we are bringing out collections that were damaged in the fire, but we're also extending the gallery so it's got as much space as we used to have before the war.
And carrying on the theme of afterlife, should we go take a look at our star attraction of the new gallery?
Yeah, we have this mummy room now. We used to have a mummy room in the 1850s. Joseph Mayer opened the first Egyptian museum in Liverpool, as it was called, on Colquitt Street, and he had a mummy room. It was always popular with visitors. And he is the collector of these 2 Sekhmet statues that we have.
I think some of our viewers might recognise these statues from the atrium of World Museum, which is where they used to live, guarding the stairwells. So they've got a more important role now. They're guarding the entrance to the mummy room. They're the guardians of the mummy room. And if you look closely, you can see she's got the face, the head of a lioness, including a beautiful mane around here. And she's actually wearing jewellery. You can see this broad bead collar and a tripartite wig, just a fancy word for saying it's got lappets at the front and the back. And she's wearing a solar sun disk. She's a daughter of the sun god Ra. She's a ferocious goddess. Some people call her, the goddess that growls or growled. She's also a goddess associated with warfare, and it's
fascinating thing that she was caught up in a war in modern times. So the heat of the fire shattered the Sekhmet to pieces. The May Blitz, 1941. And if you look close, you can see where we've joined the pieces together. It was 50 years later that the museum gathered all the pieces of the Sekhmet together and made these joins. But it's the first time we've been able to put both Sekhmets back upstairs with the rest of the Egyptian gallery. We've also brought out many more objects. It's a similar story that the heat of the fire caused them to shatter. And if you look really closely, just behind her, you see the lovely ears. I love her. Behind here, you've got the name Belzoni. And this isn't an ancient Egyptian name, and you can see it's written in Roman text. So it's the name actually of the collector of these two pieces, Giovanni Belzoni, an Italian man. Used to be a circus strongman, engineer, and he turned his skills to helping collect antiquities as an agent for one of the British consuls, Henry Salts. And these pieces ended up in a stately home, actually, a castle in Staffordshire, Arley Castle, Viscount Valentia's stately home, where they lived until 1852, and then Joseph Mayer went down to an auction there and bought the two of them. But if we step inside now, we can take a look at our new mummy room. Sorry, Scott.
So, should we take a look at this child mummy?
Yeah, sure.
It's quite interesting.
This is one of the 10 mummies that are on display in this new gallery. So we've got the most amount of mummies outside on display outside of London. So if you're fascinated by mummification, about the afterlife, this is really the gallery for you to visit. And this mummy is of a young boy. You can see he's wrapped really elaborately. This is typical of the time. This is the Roman era. This is when Egypt is part of the Roman Empire. And people at this time, in particular the town where this boy grew up, Hawara, were opting for this practice of mixing a bit of ancient Greek culture. So you can look very carefully. He's got a portrait panel of him there, which is not very typically ancient Egyptian, and then going for this ancient Egyptian style of mummification and wrapping in bandages. It's beautifully preserved. It was found by Flinders Petrie, who's kind of the father of Egyptian archaeology, and this was found in 1911 and came to the museum because the museum would sponsor excavations and in return would receive some of the material that the Egyptian authorities allow out of Egypt along with the archaeologist.
I think some of the visitors might recognise this mummy hand that was on display in the old gallery.
Yes.
It's got these beautiful rings.
Yeah, this fragment of a mummy, so a hand, has been on display since the 1970s, and many people always ask me about this when they find out, that you work in the museum. It's extraordinarily well preserved, what's left. And Herodotus, when he visited Egypt in the 5th century, wrote about different standards of mummification that people could receive, and the most expensive was a treatment where that apply a layer of gold leaf onto the skin, and you can see there is still gold leaf remaining on the skin here. So someone very elite, or certainly someone with access to resources that could afford such a high standard mummification. But the rings are the most fascinating objects on here. The two obelisk ones. There's some other rings, but it's the ones shaped as obelisks. So made of lapis lazuli and gold, capped at both ends. They're unique. There's no other rings like them. It's a really special artifact.
So we've got something that's been on display before, but there's also a lot that's not been on display before.
Yeah.
For instance, this gentleman here.
Yeah, Huanefa. Yeah, I was really keen to extend that display so we could bring out mummies that have been in storage since World War II, where they were caught up in the May Blitz. So the mummy of Huanefa, you see that it's been covered with a shroud, but it was damaged in the war, and we have an early drawing from 1860 which shows originally there was a mask on the mummy. So we often talk about what the history of the object, what's happened, but also the great work that our conservators and our conservation department have done to clean these objects and prepare them and stabilise them so they can go on display in this amazing showcase which controls the environment for the objects to help preserve them for a long time. And if you go around this side, there's a mummy and a set of coffins that people may recognise as well from the posters we have outside the museum of a man called Paddy Moon.
Yes. And so who was Paddy Moon? Do we know much about him?
Yeah, we do. Thankfully, because the preservation of his coffins is where we find most of the data about the mummies is on their coffins. And Paddy Moon was a sailor of the Bark of the Moon, so he was a very high-ranking member of the priesthood who was responsible for these river festivals that would go on in Thebes, where a statue of the god was brought out in a shrine and placed on a boat, carried through the town, and then sailed around on the Nile for this great festival that people could take part in. And he was the chief, essentially, of these ceremonies. So imagine, I don't know, like royal pageants we have nowadays, and Ekra is in charge of those things. He has an unfortunate story, though. His mummy was actually sold in a lottery of sorts, and he was moved to a manor house in Gloucestershire and unwrapped at a garden party by the owner in 1851, and there was a Cirencester brass band playing as poor Paddy Moon was unwrapped, and all these people watching. The surgeon at the time broke him in two, and also left behind a scoop that he'd been looking inside Paddy Moon's head, and on the X-rays. So we put lots of information on the labels, including the X-ray images of the scoop that was left inside his head. So when the curator in the 60s X-rayed the mummies, she got quite excited that this might be an ancient tool. I think most people know about removing the brains from the mummies with a tool, but it's from the 1850s.
So we don't want to give too much away in the new gallery before it opens tomorrow.
No.
So I think we can finish on this mummy mural here, which I believe explains that the afterlife was not always an easy thing to get to.
No, it wasn't a guarantee you were going to get there. So you had to rely on not only being mummified, so your body's preserved, but also spells to get you there. So we worked with an artist to paint these spells from one of our coffins on the wall, and these would have helped the owner, Aset, female mummy, reach the afterlife. But what we found actually when we were copying the text is that there's lots of spelling mistakes within the spells. We had to get help from a friend of mine at the University of Liverpool to look at some of these spells, because there seemed to be something wrong going on. And a lot of objects, actually, such as the Book of the Dead and coffins, were purchased, I think, because of the quality of the pictures and how they appeared, and less attention on the actual hieroglyphs. So I'm not sure if Aset really reached the afterlife, because there's quite a few spelling mistakes on her coffin. And unfortunately, we don't know where Mummy is as well. The museum just received the coffin without her mummy. But this is really, it's a great decoration for the mummy room, because it's all about this getting through to the field of reeds, as they would call it. So we've gone for this lovely green colour. And then beyond the mummy room, there's another gallery all about the afterlife, so the place that people hoped they would get to, where they'd be joined by those shabties that we saw at the start of the film to magically appear and do all the work for them, where they just sat about having a feast. So.
That was brilliant. So thanks, Ashley, for joining us today. Thanks, everyone, for watching. It would be great to know your feedback down in the comments below. So Ancient Egypt Return Through Time opens tomorrow at World Museum, 10 a.m. Make sure you come along and see everything that's here. You can find out more on the website, liverpoolmuseums.org.uk/Ancient Egypt. Thanks.